Nearly a year after last April's general election, Prime Minister Mark Carney could soon eke out a majority government with a slate of by-elections set for next Monday. He's been hovering near the 172-seat threshold, losing some MPs to diplomatic appointments, but gaining others with 4 floor crossers in as many months. In the Greater Toronto Area, 2 seats are up for grabs, and both are considered Liberal strongholds. In Terrebonne, Quebec, the Supreme Court invalidated last year's election result after the Liberals won by a single vote, but a mail-in ballot for the Bloc Québécois was not counted. And now the Liberals are neck and neck with the Bloc in that riding.
Something is shifting inside Canadian politics that most people have completely missed. Not a dramatic announcement, not a press conference, not an election, just a quiet, methodical accumulation of power that is approaching a threshold, and once it crosses the rules of Canadian governance, change in ways Washington is not prepared for. The number is 173. That is what Mark Carney actually needs, not 172, the nominal majority threshold. With the Speaker bound by convention not to cast a deciding vote except in a tie sitting at exactly 172, leaves a government perpetually 1 abstention away from a standoff. 1 seat beyond that changes everything. 3 by-elections are scheduled for next Monday. 2 ridings in the Greater Toronto Area, both of them Liberal strongholds. 1 in Terrebonne, Quebec, where last year's election result was invalidated by the Supreme Court of Canada. After a single mail-in ballot for the Bloc, Québécois was left uncounted, handing the Liberals a win by 1 vote that the court threw out. That riding is now polling at 46% Liberal against 31% Bloc, according to alleged survey. The Liberals are not running the Terrebonne campaign like a close race. They are reportedly skipping local candidate debates. 1 MP has traveled to the riding 7 times. The Liberal convention in Montreal was scheduled just before the by-elections, ensuring the entire Liberal apparatus would be concentrated nearby at the exact moment it was needed. 4 members of opposition parties have already crossed the floor to sit with the Liberals over the past several months. Up to 10 more opposition MPs are currently in active discussions with representatives from Carney's office. These are not rumors. These are ongoing conversations described by multiple sources close to the file. The government is not waiting for an election to expand its base. It is doing it between elections 1 member at a time, through persuasion, positioning, and policy, the slow mechanics of consolidation, rather than the high-stakes gamble of a campaign. What Carney would do immediately, upon crossing 173 seats, is not speculative either. The first move is seizing committee control. Right now, parliamentary committees operate outside the government's direct authority. They have their own composition, their own agendas, and they have produced delays on key legislation, including the budget implementation bill. The moment the government controls the standing orders, it controls those committees. Opposition parties would fight it. The Bloc and the Conservatives would, in the words of one Ottawa observer, be raising bloody hell, but they would lose. That is the point. Majority control does not require consensus. It requires votes, and 173 seats is enough votes. A cabinet shuffle is also expected to follow the by-elections. Carney has explicitly ruled out prorogation, the parliamentary suspension that Justin Trudeau deployed and that generated sustained public backlash. The message in ruling it out is deliberate. It says the government is confident enough in its existing legislative framework to keep working inside it rather than shutting it down and resetting it. That confidence is not unfounded. Nick Nanos projects the Liberals winning over 200 seats in a general election at current polling levels. The Liberals are sitting at 48% nationally. Carney leads Pierre Poilievre by 29 percentage points on personal popularity, a gap that veteran political analysts say they have never seen in their careers. And yet Carney is not calling that election. He is explicitly the person in the room pushing back against it, even while advisors around him can read the same poll numbers he can. The reasoning is layered. Calling a snap election at peak popularity means testing that popularity, and the Liberals know what that looks like. They entered the most recent campaign 10 points ahead and nearly watched that margin collapse entirely by voting day. Beyond the polling risk, there is a more fundamental calculation. An election campaign would consume the government's attention for weeks at the exact moment the CUSMA joint review is approaching its July 1st deadline, when trade negotiations with China are deepening and when the relationship with Washington remains unstable and requires constant management. The Prime Minister's core political brand right now is stability. Running an election to chase a larger majority would hand opponents a ready narrative political opportunism dressed as governance that could undercut the very thing making Carney popular. The external context is doing significant work for Carney's domestic position. Canada's economy is absorbing real damage from US tariffs. Manufacturing, employment down, steel exports contracting, unemployment rising in industrial communities. Those are genuine economic pressures on real people. But the political assignment of responsibility for those pressures is not landing on Carney's desk. Voters are tracing the damage to Washington, not Ottawa. Pierre Poilievre has tried repeatedly to frame the economic deterioration as a domestic governance failure. It is not working. The Léger numbers show it is not working. The 29-point personal popularity gap shows it is not. Canadians are applying a different evaluative framework, not asking who caused the prosperity of the prior decade, but asking who is the right person to hold the line during the disruption of this one. Carney's background answers that question in a way no other politician in Canada can. He ran the Bank of Canada during the financial crisis. He ran the Bank of England through Brexit. He chaired Brookfield Asset Management, overseeing a global portfolio exceeding $500 billion. When people say he seems competent and that he is the right person for this moment, they are not expressing a vague preference for calm leadership. They're expressing a specific judgment that his resume fits the current crisis better than any alternative. And that judgment is proving durable in ways that short-term economic pain is not eroding. The CUSMA review in July will be the first major test of what a majority-controlled Carney government looks like in high-stakes external negotiations. Canada arrives at that table, having diversified $69 billion in trade to non-US markets over the past year, having signed a financial cooperation pact with the People's Bank of China, having launched a Canada-China Financial Working Group with Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem in the room, having secured agricultural market access in Beijing, energy agreements in Tokyo, and trade partnerships across 3 continents. A country that has spent 18 months systematically reducing its dependence on the US market does not need to beg at the July review table. What 3 by-elections next Monday could set in motion is not just a technical seat count adjustment. It is the final structural piece of a consolidation that has been assembling quietly for months. Parliamentary committee control, an accelerated legislative agenda, a cabinet reshuffle, and a negotiating posture toward Washington. Backed by the Washington. Full weight of majority governance. The opposition can see it coming. They cannot stop it. The numbers do not allow it. In modern politics, power accumulated slowly and without drama is almost always more durable than power seized quickly and visibly. Carney appears to understand that better than most.
Do you agree then that Americans are paying those tariffs?
I think, no, I don't agree. I think that they might be paying something, but when you take the overall impact, the Americans are gaining tremendously.
We know the world's changing. Decades-long process of our ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States has ended, and as a consequence of that, many of our strengths have become our vulnerabilities. Headline, last year, 90% of our aluminum exports went to the United States.
Trump in big trouble. Because the very tariffs he once celebrated as an economic masterstroke are now coming back to haunt him politically, legally, and economically.
President Trump talks of annexing our country through economic coercion. Well, Canadians have made it very clear that we will not back down and we will not give in to this coercion, ultimately starting this war. President Trump's tariffs against you are causing that. And there are no winners in a trade war.
For years, Donald Trump promised Americans that his aluminum and steel tariffs would make foreign countries pay. He framed them as economic warfare tools, shields to protect US, industry, and weapons to punish unfair trade rivals. But now, behind closed doors in Washington, officials are reportedly weighing rolling parts of those tariffs back. And the reason isn't diplomatic pressure from China or Europe. It's something far more politically dangerous, an affordability crisis at home. What makes this moment explosive is the timing. Approval ratings are under pressure, consumer costs remain elevated, and industries that once quietly absorbed tariff shocks are now openly signaling strain. According to reports first highlighted in major financial outlets, the administration is considering narrowing or adjusting metal tariffs to ease economic pressure. Publicly, the White House has dismissed the idea as speculation. But the language from trade officials tells a different story. describing the tariff system as nimble and open to clarifications. In policy terms, that's Washington's way of preparing the ground for a retreat without calling it one. The deeper problem lies in who actually paid for these tariffs. Politically, the message was simple. Foreign producers would absorb the cost. But trade economics doesn't work that way. Tariffs are collected at U.S. ports, paid primarily by importers, which means American companies. And research from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York delivered the statistic that changed the political narrative. Nearly 90% of the tariff burden fell on U.S. firms and consumers, not foreign exporters. That reality reshapes the entire story. Because aluminum isn't a niche commodity, it's a backbone material of the modern economy. It goes into vehicles, aircraft, construction frameworks, electrical systems, packaging, and defense manufacturing. When tariffs drove aluminum prices higher, the cost pressure didn't stay in metal markets. It rippled outward into auto production, housing construction, infrastructure projects, and consumer goods. Manufacturers either absorbed thinner margins or passed costs downstream. And ultimately, American buyers felt it. This is where the affordability crisis enters the equation. Elevated metal prices quietly fed into the cost of homes, cars, appliances, and public infrastructure. Every steel beam in a building, every aluminum panel in a vehicle carried embedded tariff costs. Over time, those costs compound across the economy. So when policymakers began searching for drivers behind persistent price pressure, tariffs, once politically untouchable, re-entered the conversation. But economics isn't the only pressure point closing in. There's also a legal storm forming. The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to rule on the legitimacy of the tariff framework itself, particularly the use of national security authorities to justify broad metal duties. If the court determines that emergency powers were stretched too far, it could undermine the legal foundation of the tariffs altogether. That wouldn't just halt them, it could open the door to massive refund claims from importers who paid billions under the policy. At the same time, political unity behind the tariffs is fracturing. In a striking development, the Republican-controlled House voted to reject tariffs on Canadian goods, a symbolic but significant rebuke. Canada isn't viewed as a strategic adversary. It's America's largest aluminum supplier and a deeply integrated defense industrial partner. Tariffs on Canadian metals strained supply chains more than they protected them. Lawmakers opposing the duties argue that punishing allied producers undermines North American manufacturing cohesion at a time when Western economies are trying to de-risk from rival powers, not each other. Global markets are already reacting to the possibility of change. Aluminum prices dipped on reports that tariffs might be rolled back or narrowed. That's because tariffs artificially distort supply flows. Remove or reduce them, and global inventory can move more freely into US markets, easing price pressure. Even speculation of policy softening sends signals through commodity exchanges, investor forecasts, and manufacturing procurement strategies. What makes this policy dilemma so complex is that the original tariffs weren't purely economic. They were geopolitical. They were designed to pressure China's industrial expansion, renegotiate trade arrangements, and force supply chains back onto American soil. Aluminum became a strategic lever, not just a traded metal. Rolling tariffs back, therefore, isn't just a price decision. It's a signal about how aggressively the U.S. wants to wield trade power moving forward. Now the administration faces a no-win balancing act. And it's not theoretical, it's structural. Keeping the tariffs in place continues to insulate domestic aluminum and steel producers from foreign price competition. U.S. smelters, many of which operate with higher labor, energy, and regulatory costs than overseas rivals, rely on that tariff wall to remain commercially viable. Remove it too quickly, and cheaper imports can re-enter the market at scale, undercutting domestic output and threatening plant utilization, investment, and jobs concentrated in politically sensitive industrial regions. But maintaining the tariffs preserves a different kind of pressure, one that radiates outward into the rest of the economy. Manufacturers that depend on aluminum and steel don't operate behind protective barriers. Automakers, aerospace firms, construction contractors, machinery producers, and packaging companies all purchase metals as inputs, not outputs. For them, tariffs function as embedded production taxes. Higher input costs compress margins, force price increases, or trigger supply chain restructuring. Over time, that cost burden migrates downstream into vehicle prices, housing costs, infrastructure budgets, and consumer goods. Shielding one industrial tier, in effect, taxes the others. This creates a political collision between two domestic blocs: upstream metal producers seeking protection and downstream manufacturers seeking relief. Both are strategically important. Both employ large workforces. And both carry lobbying weight in Washington. Any tariff adjustment risks alienating one side while satisfying the other, which is why policy signals have leaned toward partial rollbacks, exemptions, or quota systems rather than full removal. Complicating this balancing act is the legal uncertainty now hovering over the entire tariff framework. The Supreme Court's pending review doesn't focus on commodity pricing or industrial policy. It targets the executive authority used to impose the tariffs in the first place. If the court determines that national security justifications were applied too broadly, it could invalidate the legal mechanism underpinning the duties. That outcome wouldn't simply pressure policymakers to reconsider tariffs. It could strip them of the unilateral power to maintain them. In that scenario, tariffs wouldn't unwind through negotiation or phased policy revision. They could collapse abruptly through judicial ruling, potentially triggering refund claims and resetting trade exposure overnight. What began as a policy designed to externalize economic pain has instead illustrated the containment limits of modern trade warfare. In tightly integrated supply chains, cost impositions rarely stay confined to foreign producers. They diffuse, importers adjust sourcing, suppliers recalibrate pricing, manufacturers absorb or pass on expenses. Consumers encounter higher-end product costs. The economic impact disperses across nodes of the same system the tariffs were meant to protect. Trump's aluminum tariffs were constructed as economic armor, a defensive barrier to preserve industrial capacity and strategic autonomy. But over time, that armor has revealed weight as well as protection. The longer tariffs remain, the more they reshape domestic cost structures, investment decisions, and political alignments. Which leads to the unresolved strategic dilemma now facing Washington. Not whether tariffs delivered leverage abroad, but whether sustaining that leverage imposes a cumulative cost at home that outweighs its original purpose.